Hello and welcome to Issue Space. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist and the creator of Issue Space. We curate conversations for people working in social impact professionally to unpack what that really means and what it's like. In my experience, working in social change work has been some of the most rewarding, affirming, hope-giving, life-bringing work that I've had a privilege to be a part of, but it is not without its challenges. And I think that the people who are committed to making a positive change as they make a living are deserving of space to process that. So that is at the heart of Issue Space. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and you can learn more about us at issuespacemedia.com. This episode of the Issue Space podcast is called The Change Department, Advancing Impact at Brands and Businesses. And when I was doing my sleuthing across my network and my network's network, trying to figure out where to start conversationally with Issue Space, there was a lot of interest and energy around discussing the experience of working on social change from within an organization that was not founded on a social purpose. So it can be quite different from joining an organization that is a nonprofit, 100% devoted to a social mission, joining a foundation with a philanthropic kind of like ethos and portfolio, as opposed to joining a business who willfully or with resistance might be moving towards getting more involved in social change issues. So I wanted to hold some space for this community to process that. I was poking around trying to see what is the cultural temperament around brands and businesses being involved in social impact work in this moment. I have only been in this work for less than 10 years, and I feel like it has already been that's kind of niche. We don't really do that. Look elsewhere, to huge cultural explosion. You look absolutely crazy if you don't have a social impact platform as a business, but especially a major brand, to now somewhere in between. So I was just curious, I am a big believer that brands and businesses are a part of the social fabric, and that we would be remiss if we were to look back in a generation of change making and had invested no effort in trying to make change with and within and for businesses to show up more supportively for society. But that is me, and that's my bias. And I've worked with people who feel differently, who don't have as much hope because they are looking at capitalism, basically, and looking at brands and businesses sitting in the center of that and having a hard time squaring how could the solutions we need possibly come out of these spaces, kind of in the spirit of that saying that you won't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. I hope I'm getting that right. But I believe that this is where we are. We're all a part of society. We're all a part of culture. So why not do this work together? And I was kind of heartened, almost surprised to see that the temperament is still leaning that way in this moment in 2024. Forbes had published a piece, and I will gather all the links and all the things and put them in the show notes for you to explore. But they published a piece sharing that feelings around brands and businesses being involved in social change work are trending more strongly year over year. So whether your reaction is positive or negative, you're more likely to care at all than you would have in years past. And I think the significance of that is it kind of feels like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. People are going to have strong reactions. So why not try to do something positive with the possibility of making change? And then even just from a purely consumer standpoint, I'm sure we have all heard the trends by now, but the millennial generation, both has a lot of purchasing power and currently is the largest segment of the workforce here in the United States where I live and work. And so when you're thinking about this group of people who really value social consciousness, and it's kind of pulling the entire mainstream media and cultural landscape towards social consciousness, and you think about the fact that they not only want to buy with businesses that have some sort of social commitment and a net positive footprint in the world, but they mostly only want to work at businesses. I think the last number I saw, which was published by Harvard Business School, was like 70% of people that they polled wanted to work at a company that had a positive social mission. Then it makes sense that we don't sort of let any sort of like backlash or resistance to this work intimidate brands and businesses out of showing up for social change. So that's a little bit of the landscape. And we have a great conversationalist with us today to explore these topics. I'm so pleased to welcome to the space Erica Soto Lamb. Erica has done advocacy work from pop culture to politics. She has a really impressive and long history of using public affairs and communications and strategic skills to help everyone from elected officials to new organizations who are trying to garner civic engagement to now her post as VP of Social Impact Strategy at the Showtime
and MTV.
An MTV group within Paramount.
It's a mouthful.
Listen, your girl is trying to get the whole conglomerate.
Yeah.
I need my little cheat sheet for the corporate. But it's just, it's just such a wonderful, rich portfolio and work history that you have, Erica. And I'm so pleased that you're joining us today. So hello and welcome.
Kat, thank you so much first for creating this space that I do think is lacking amongst practitioners who are looking to do work that changes the world, and especially for inviting me to be part of the conversation. Really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Erica, I gave a version of your work history that you are welcome to augment or adjust at any time. But I also wanted to invite you, if there's anything that you could share with us personally that you feel comfortable sharing, maybe about your heritage or how you were raised, any of the person of Erica who goes with you into the work, just so we can know more about who we're speaking with today.
Absolutely. Well, you got everything right. But as we know, there's so much more to any of us than the current job title. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you about who I am and where I come from. And so I have to start at the beginning. And a still very core part of my identity is that I grew up in El Paso, Texas, on the border, and I'm Mexican American. And that has been, one of the most significant, if not the most significant, shaping force of my life and where I've gone since. My parents were public school educators. I knew from a very early start that the experience I was having growing up in El Paso was different, and that I wasn't having access to opportunity in a way that a young person growing up in a less poor part of the country would have. And that was really because I had parents who were working in public education and understood the system. I was in Texas during the 90s, growing up in the 90s, when I believe George Bush introduced the term achievement gap, which, this was a topic in my family's dinner table conversations. And I came to realize now we have the term opportunity gap. And that's really what it's about. That achievement is possible for any and all of us, but we don't always have the same opportunity to do that. So that's a really core part of who I am. I think I'd also like to note that my early career was in politics on political campaigns. The first, what I wanted to be when I grow up was to be a lawyer. And I think that was born out of a really primary sense of fairness and equity and wanting to work towards that. I think once I got to college and realized, what that actually means, I'm grateful that I knew this. I don't think this is right for me, but at the core value of why I wanted to be a lawyer is about standing up for the little guys, or people, so to speak, people who have less, people who need representation, and that can happen in different ways beyond the courtroom. So I do sort of see the through line, even as, from my little girl vision of my life, and also being from El Paso, not a lot of insight into the different kinds of career paths. It was like, and being from immigrant background, that, are you going to be a doctor or a lawyer?
Oh my God.
Those were the options.
All day. Hard to relate.
That would lead to wealth generation, which I really
Yes.
appreciate and understand how and where that comes from when you come from an immigrant background. But I didn't know until I tried it on for size. And I'm really grateful that my path led me to working in electoral politics and then into, a number of years working in public affairs agencies where I advised campaigns, companies, nonprofits, mostly on their communication strategy, but then over time more on, advocacy and culture change strategy. So that's really how I got to this big media company, was actually after working. One of my clients at the time of the Sandy Hook shooting was an organization that still exists, called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. It was founded by Michael Bloomberg. And when the Sandy Hook tragedy happened, we realized this was an opportunity to build a movement of understanding about gun violence, not only as a problem when it's a school shooting in an affluent white community, but that this is happening every day in our country and in every town, which is actually the origin story of the name of Every Town for Gun Safety, which includes Moms Demand Action. And I'm really proud of the work that we did there that was very politically focused, but it was also where the insight of we also need culture change. And what eventually brought me into working for major media brands that have the power to affect culture as well.
Hmm. Thank you so much for the added, much richer background. I really respect what you shared about just the sense of place and your identity. I have some colleagues just throughout the network who have been increasingly shifting their culture change work to acknowledge that more. But and I think it's really apt because what you see around you does inform your beliefs. And then I think you took the route of, I can fight this. Like I can, whether it's my weapon is law or my weapon now is, media and culture change, like I can help build a different reality or sense of potential for people. But that ties back to what life was like on the ground. So I really appreciate you sharing that part of your background with us. I want to start with just a fundamental question. Why do you believe? So I'm gathering from the work that you do, you moved, as you just acknowledged, from politics, which is arguably, or I think in some people's estimation would be the sharp point of change making. Like, let's change who's in charge, let's change the policies, let's change the laws that interplay with all of those things, or uphold them. But you are, like many, one who also sees the value in the sort of media and culture landscape and doing that in the context of a for-profit major corporation. And I'm just wondering, in your intuition and your gut reaction, why do you ultimately believe that brands and businesses should be a part of change making, can be a part of change making?
Well, I think we all, as consumers of media content or consumers of any sort of product, know that we are shaped by what we're served. And I know some of my fundamental ideas come from, the movies and TV shows I watched as a kid, that it's up to us to decide what kind of ideas we're going to put into the cultural waters. And it really is a choice of um, how we're going to represent certain groups of people or not represent them. Because I think there's a lot of invisibility for the various stories that we have, the richness of the stories that can be told.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, it's a question of whether or not, and I will hope that, as you said in the intro, Kat, brands and companies will see that as an opportunity. Not only, well, I should say, because it's the right thing to do, but to make the business case for why it makes sense to do. Because, as you noted, younger consumers are lining up with the brands and they want to work for brands and companies that are aligned with their values. So I think, it is a fact that brands and and companies have a role to play. And the question is, what role are you going to play?
Mm,
I'm lucky and grateful that, the brands and company and industry I work within is very easily understood because we're all consumers of media. But I think
mhm,
it's really a case to be made across industry because every entity has constituents, to use like a very
mhm,
political term. Like you
mhm.
have a team, you have employees, you have we're communicating in so many ways, and you can find ways to leverage your position to do good.
You mentioned it being important to find the right role to play, which really resonates with me from like impact consulting land. That's always if you're working with a partner who's in that foundational stage of I want to do good in the world, what should I be focusing my resources on? What should I be focusing my platform on? It always kind of starts with what role are you best equipped to play, and then let's find a need from there that you can meaningfully support. Can you speak a little bit about, because I believe one of the things that you have accomplished in your current position is sort of solidifying what the focal social impact sort of issue or hill for your brand is going to be, your brand group is going to be. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about that, as well as how you arrived. Like, what was the process like for you as the champion, but more broadly for your team sitting within a way bigger organization that has so many competing priorities of honing in on that area?
Yeah, well, I think, Kat, what you're speaking to is the need for authenticity in what a brand or company decides to take on, because which is necessary. The work will suffer if it's not. And also, you know, consumers, audience, they're smart, they're astute. They know what's meaningful and what is, rainbow washing, or something that's like, well, it are your core values or what you produce or how you show up in the world in line with what you're marketing to me about what you care about, that then that poses a risk when it doesn't. So, I do feel again lucky that one of the principal brands that I work for is MTV. And, MTV it's not a nonprofit. We're here to make money. It is a media brand. But I do think that from its origin, which is now more than 40 years ago, it was created with a vision of being a media company for young people, by young people. And young people have always been at the tip of the spear for social
Mm,
change. So it's always had that at its root. And our priorities at MTV have been uh, many, many decades in development of continuing to find ways to advance youth voter participation, which is a major focus of my work right now, and also youth mental health. So I think that in the case of MTV, I have been trying to find ways to do it better, like to learn from how it has been done before, to move beyond PSAs or sort of the early versions of this kind of work into what will be most effective, what kind of programs and partnerships. Um, but to answer your question, one of the other brands that I work with, and it was actually the first brand that I came into the company to lead social impact for, was Comedy Central. And Comedy Central had never had a social impact team leader. And so it was really an exciting experience to come in and understand the senior leadership and also understand the audience. That was basically what I did in my first 90 days was, okay, I'm here to figure out how we can leverage comedy for social change. There are so many different directions that we can go, but it needs to make sense for us as the brand and the people who make it. And it needs to be something that will serve the audience. And so after research, we came to decide, and which has been very helpful in my continued work with MTV, that mental health was something that needed culture change, that we needed to continue to do the work of destigmatizing, talking about your emotional well-being. And I will say that what I'm proud of is moving beyond just talking about suicide prevention. It doesn't mean not continuing to talk about suicide prevention. That is so important, but to move beyond just talking about crisis moments.
Mm.
Because as we all know, there's everyday emotional supports that we need, and figuring out how to move people towards mental health awareness, which is one of my pet peeves. I hate awareness months, especially when we are already more than aware and it's time to move towards action.
Well said. And I also love the point of moving beyond moments of crisis into every day, because that is something that to me, brands, particularly larger brands, are uniquely positioned to do. You are interacting with brands from the moment you wake up on your branded sheets and brush your teeth with your branded toothpaste. Like
Yeah,
there's just consumers are having an ongoing relationship, wittingly or not, with the personas of major businesses in a way that, for better or worse, they're just not having with nonprofits and philanthropies and foundations. Like the relationship is with you.
totally.
And so that, that's kind of like at the heart of why I land on the side of like, why would we not try to build with brands and businesses? And I appreciate what you said. So contrasting the sort of like your lived professional experience between pursuing change in a context like the MTV example, you had like this legacy to stand on. And it sounds like it was more about like advancement, modernization, like what we're not really necessarily changing the mission, but we're going to find like interesting new, like maybe channels, content, the packaging, so
Yeah.
that we can connect with the current generation of young people sounded like the mission. Whereas when you were, making a platform from scratch, it was more about what is the specific slice of this challenge that we're uniquely positioned to solve. And I'm hearing kind of between the lines that if the mission is around destigmatization, comedy is like a great way to do that. Culture in general is a great way to do that. Did you ever experience, I'm going to bring in like some insights floating around in the back of my head when I was talking to folks about like, what should we speak about in issue space? The folks who were passionate about hearing about change making experiences at businesses, a few of them mentioned a sense of loneliness. So even when they weren't getting active resistance, I think it probably varies case by case where each business is in their sort of like social impact journey. A few of them felt like at times maybe they felt really integrated to the core mission, and then at others they kind of felt like they were like on the outside, like looking through the window, shouting like, "Hey, don't forget about this thing," like playing off your note, like it might not be Awareness Month anymore, but I'm still trying
Yeah.
to like save people over here,
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if any aspect of that resonates with you, whether in your own experience or things you've witnessed with peers and colleagues in the space, and just could you affirm any of that experience, that it can be sort of uniquely challenging to sort of like fully integrate and take center stage when your core company mission is something separate from your personal mission as the impact person?
It is hard to be, one of these is not like the other. One of these just doesn't belong. It's not to say that you don't belong, but I don't generate revenue for my company. I spend the revenue on doing good.
That's real.
And there's no bones about it. And however, many of the people that I work with are revenue. Most of them are, and I need them. I need to have strong partnerships with colleagues who are focused on that. And I do think it's when you come knocking on the proverbial colleague's door, even though we all mostly work from home, with an ask about, um, partnering on the next social impact campaign or development, they they want to do it, but it may not be in the job description. Uh, and I will add into what you've heard that is particularly difficult at a time of like economic insecurity. And when you work in a company where, there's a lot of tenuousness, And I think, this is happening across industries, but particularly in media. I think it can, when you know that, there could be another round of layoffs on the horizon,
Hmm.
that does have a chilling effect on the ability to get others to roll up their sleeves and see what we can do, because they want to be performing, 100% on the specific job description that they have. And I also think that there's like a more risk aversion when you know that your job could be on the line um, to doing something outside of the box, which is often what I'm looking for my colleagues to do.
Totally.
And that's hard, but it's also very understandable. And I think that is why leadership is so important. And I am lucky to have this in the current case that I am, it's not just me trying to get us to do something good. I'm doing that, with the directive of our most senior leaders who have decided that this is a priority. So that kind of buy-in, that kind of backing is hard, but I think it's a continuous cycle of making the case for why this is good for us, and then getting the support you need to be able to continue to do it.
I mean, maybe I'm just like, no, tell me a different answer because you kind of just said, is that just part of the gig, just continual case making? Like, how do you hold presence? How do you hold people's attention? Because everything you're talking about is so real and it's hyper present, you know? And I imagine it's also kind of echoed on the consumer side. It might be different with media. I don't know that media consumption patterns change in times of economic downturn. Maybe somebody knows, I don't know.
I mean, people have cut the cords and changed the way that they consume media, and that's had a big impact on our company.
I see. I see. But yeah, I just to that point, I was going to mention that consumers also get conservative or at least very focused in moments of economic instability, where if you say your call to action was around sort of like donating or something as opposed to civic engagement, you might find that it's harder to engage people. But
For sure.
like, are there any specific tactics when you talk about bridge building inside of your organization and finding your champions and staying on leadership's like priority part of the agenda? Are there any tactics or experiences that you've found work particularly well for kind of holding your ground?
Yeah, I think, in respect to, the beginning of the how lonely this work can be, one of the innovations that I'm really proud of being a part of is building partnerships. So brands also and companies don't want to be lonely in the work. So a lot of what we do is build partnerships with other companies so that we're doing it together. And I think that also, even in the context of working with, my colleagues, shows like, hey, we're doing this in partnership with Levi's or Snap or TikTok. And they can see that it's not, we're not doing this alone, and we're not just doing it for our own credit or marketing purposes, but
Mm,
because we are doing our part to create change. And I love that so much of our work now, I call it ownerless and open source. So actually this week we launched our election campaign. It's called Vote 24. And we did it in partnership with the Ad Council. So all of the creative, all of the assets that we've developed that will be on MTV and a number of other brands at Paramount, including CBS, is also being made available via the Ad Council to any media company that wants to pick it up and put it out. And for their purposes, the MTV logo and the Paramount Mountain and Stars, they fall away. Like we don't need the credit. What we want is to create the change um, on this social issue of civic engagement. And it's amazing that, I'm not the marketing team, but so many people have had a hand in creating something that, yes, will be put out by our brand, but is even more excitingly going to have further reach with the message of get out the vote, ask your friends to vote.
Coalition. I love that. It's not so different from the grassroots approach, which is a good reminder even for myself. Um, do you get pressure, internal pressure around ROI? As I recognized, you said earlier that like, I don't make money, I spend money. And even just thinking of parallels, so we know that like the coalition mindset is something we see in grassroots organizing that you're pointing out is also a part of corporate change making tactics. And similarly, when I heard you say that like this is a different kind of department, we operate differently, it echoes things that I've heard from colleagues at nonprofits in the marketing arm of their nonprofit, as opposed to say like the fundraising arm, or like a major gifts team,
Hmm.
they similarly, it's a different kind of investment, and it's not always as neat in terms of like the one for one, we did this, we got this. Um, and I've never been in a professional situation with social impact where it was like easy to measure the change. So I'm just wondering, like, what are those conversations? Yeah.
It's not easy. I think if I can revise a bit my earlier statement, I do spend money, but I spend it wisely. And in everything that we do, we are looking to measure the effectiveness of what we did. So, we do loop back to say, look, you internal partners built this with us, and here's the outcome. And one example, there are many, but that I'm really proud of, is a campaign that we were one of the partners in. We didn't do it alone, but we were one of the sort of founding partners of a campaign called Power the Polls in 2020, which was founded in, the early months of the pandemic, when we realized that um, there weren't enough polling locations because there weren't enough poll workers. Because for too long, we have relied on older people to be poll workers. And very understandably, they weren't showing up. And we could see that problem in the primaries. And I think like Louisville, Kentucky had one polling location in like the city limits, which
Wow.
when that happens, people are disenfranchised. And the people who are most disenfranchised are working class people, poor people who can't afford to, have caretakers for their children, long lines. So we banded together and we started Power the Polls, and we put out this call to action through many of our channels and shows and talent. But the one that really made the difference was the Daily Show. And it was because that audience is like primed to do more, right? Asking them to check their registration or register to vote is sort of a wasted call to action because they're fans of a political satire news show. And in coalition with others, I know for a fact that Daily Show recruited more than 100,000 people to sign up to be poll workers.
Wow.
And the whole campaign,
Wow.
in partnership with other companies and nonprofits, recruited more than 700,000 in that first year. And, the November election was fully staffed. Power of the Polls actually continues to today because there are still staffing shortages, and the Daily Show is still doing its part to call on its audience to show up. And so, yes, yeah, you bet your bottom dollar that when I could see the numbers coming in from the Daily Show's calls to action, I'm scooping it up and I'm sending it to the executive producer to let her know it's working. Let's keep doing it. And the feedback from the audience, the fans, is positive. So, that's a very specific example. And maybe I cite it because it's one of the easier ways to show the through line. But in our mental health work and everything we do, we're measuring. This is a very different kind of team and strategy than, when I first came in, it's like, okay, well, what have you guys been doing? And it was to a certain brand. It was like buying tables at benefits, which is not a bad thing to do. And I used to work in nonprofits, and those galas and benefits are what support the work. But I think it can't just be that.
Right.
If you can afford it, you
Right.
can build a really smart and measurable strategy for affecting change.
I love that. Thank you. I want to actually welcome another voice into the conversation because we have been having a wonderful chat about what it's like to shepherd social impact work at a brand that is very, very, very consumer facing. I don't know if it gets more consumer facing than being media. You're just like, hello, like watch here, listen to me. It's wonderful. I believe in it, and there is a whole spectrum of businesses with more or less access to consumers, and even parts of businesses with more or less access to consumers that I think is equally fascinating in terms of the potential for their role in positive change. And so I'm really pleased to welcome Ken Smith into the space. Ken is a strategist, a board member with a specialization in supplier diversity, and he is relatively newly, I think, retired, liberated from 26 years at Accenture, the professional services firm, where he left as a managing director and where he was instrumental in building out and executing their supplier diversity approach, which we will learn more about what that means. But welcome, Ken, to the space.
Well, first off, thank you so much. It's so lovely to join both you and Erica. So thank you for inviting me and including me. It's an honor. I will start with my intention. I really have already been inspired by everything Erica has so beautifully said, and you as well, Kat. And so I want to thank you for that. And I also hope that if I'm able to inspire anyone by my story and journey, then that would be also a great gift. Secondly, I think what you were mentioning, I think inspiration tied to action will truly help deliver your social impact that we are all striving to accomplish. So I just want to say thank you for creating this platform and having us. My background, I started in my little life in central Pennsylvania, a very rural small town. I was thinking, wow, shouldn't I grow up and be a race car driver? That's what I wanted to do.
Oh my gosh, wait, can I tell you my husband's obsessed with Formula One?
Ah.
He's like looking all over the world for where we should go to watch these cars. Like
It's the funny. I grew up with my father was a race car driver and sprint car racing, which is like a dirt car racing. But I will tell you this, and this is part of my story. Like growing up in a very small rural town as a gay boy, it was very difficult, and I experienced horribly a horrible amount of bullying and homophobia. And so when I looked at that dream, I thought the only way for me to achieve surviving, talking about mental health, was to continue my education and be the first in my family to go to college. And so I went to, and I was fortunate enough to come out to my family that I wanted to go to college, and then, made my way to Penn State University, where I studied business administration, focused on marketing with a minor in women's studies. That's when I got introduced to women's studies. And I thought, oh, wow, like how can I leverage this passion that I have to try to drive something better in the world? And so that's what I studied. And then after college, as you mentioned, I had a wonderful career at Accenture for 26 and a half years. I started out really growing my career in procurement. And a lot of people are like, oh, okay, what's procurement? But it's all about how companies buy goods and services and how they direct their money to be inclusive to partners who are diverse. And so when I first started out, and this is what I think is really interesting, because kind of going back to some of the parallels in the earlier conversation, I think it comes down to every individual has the ability to make an impact. Every one of us do. How big of an impact is up to us. And so when I first was like growing up in my career, I was like, okay, what is supplier diversity? So supplier diversity is how you essentially provide equal opportunities to bid on work to provide goods or services, but you're directing that procurement effort to a minority-owned business, a woman-owned business, an LGBT-owned business, a disability-owned business, or a veteran-owned business in the United States, as an example. And so there are different non-governmental organizations, which we call NGOs, that certify these business entities. So you can be certified as a women-owned business, you can be certified as an LGBT-owned business, an African-American-owned business, et cetera. And so, what we really think about when you talk about influencing change, we always say responsible procurement is good for business because how do you spend money as a consumer? You want to spend money with brands that you're referencing that are going to drive in my world, in my experience, a positive social impact. That's where we want to spend our money.
Mm-hmm.
So from a procurement perspective and a supplier diversity perspective is based on the civil rights movement was to ensure that all diverse owned businesses had equal access to provide support to companies. So supplier diversity is um, it's a relatively, I think, known space if you're in the business procurement world and supplier diversity world, but maybe not so much on the other side of the space. But it's changing, and I will say, as an example, you may have recognized unfortunately, after the murder of George Floyd and many others, several companies made public commitments to spend dollars with African American, Black owned, and Hispanic and Latina owned businesses. They made these public commitments. By 2025, we're going to increase our spend by X percent, or we're going to reach $1 billion, or whatever the big number they threw out. So a lot of brands specifically were intentional to say we need to show up and support our community differently. And even as you think about it, I feel as if a lot of businesses took that effort. They hired a small team of supplier diversity professionals that fall within procurement. And that beauty is you then get to advocate within a big business how to drive social change. I'm a big believer and I love politics. Don't get me wrong, but I firmly believe that we can change the world from a business perspective and influence positive change by following the money and ensuring that the dollars are going into the space of meaningful impact. So for an example, there is from an insights point of view, the studies prove to showcase that for every $1 million that a business spends with a diverse owned business, that diverse owned business is being able to provide 10 new jobs within their community to drive economic empowerment. And that's the beauty of it. So when you think about it, our objective in supplier diversity is to ensure that the procurement organization is looking at their total spend and providing a significant portion or making sure that there's accountability to drive sourcing events, equal opportunities, and spend with women-owned, diverse-owned businesses. And that's the beauty of when you are intentional, regardless, even if you think of yourself, if you're not in a procurement role, how can I play a part? As Erica mentioned, she has the ability to spend money. You have the ability to spend money. Everyone in the business world, whether it's small or big, has the ability to spend. What I encourage and hope to inspire is that everyone take a look at how might they influence in their business setting the ability to ensure that if they're going to spend money, that they're at least trying to spend money with a diverse owned business.
There's so much richness in what you're saying. So one is there's this Venn diagram in my mind between diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and social impact efforts. I feel that approaching social impact is incomplete just in general if there's not intentional inclusivity all around the board. So that resonates a lot. And I'm also, as you're talking about it and like sharing these examples, which actually, speaking of examples, is this a fair example of what we might mean, just to bring it to a very baseline? Like I am a cosmetics company and I need a certain plant, I need aloe or something for one of my products. So I'm going to try to make sure that a good number, if not all of the aloe farms that I work with are diverse owned. Or is that a fair example?
That's correct.
Okay. So things just like further upstream that aren't necessarily right in the consumer's face, but that all go into the product that the consumer purchases and experiences. And it's making me wonder, I don't feel like this is really, to your point about it kind of being well known in some areas and not others. I feel like this is an area that would be of immense interest to consumers. but I don't feel like the conversation is there on par with the like front line, like in Erica's role, Erica's kind of company, that immediate consumer recognition, being able to go like, oh, a campaign that I see that's talking to me in the brand voice or in coalition with a bunch of organizations that I resonate with, that feels very accessible for me to understand, both as a consumer in the traditional sense, but also like as a consumer of jobs, because I'm thinking of like
Yeah.
the issue space community, and like people change jobs or people need to discover, what opportunities might look like for them or where they're a best fit or a match. And I don't know that your side of things, procurement, supplier diversity, is as widely discussed or brought to the table as a path for purchasing or a path for a professional future. I'm curious if that resonates with you.
It absolutely does. And again, I feel as if I were to inspire everyone, would be to hold companies accountable, understand what their public commitments are for how they spend with diverse owned businesses. And even if you want to take it to a very practical level, think about it in the sense of if you go to a grocery store and you'll see now products on the shelf that will say, this is from a women-owned business. It's packaged. It's predominantly marketed on the packaging. And or if you're buying something off of a marketplace, now you will see, like Amazon as an example, you can search and sort on finding businesses that are Black-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses that, or sustainable businesses. It's a flag on there, so you have a choice every time you make a purchase at an individual level to support these companies that are promoting the sourcing and inclusivity of diverse owned businesses. But beyond those that are not visible, then I feel that's where you have to use your voice. We have to use our voice, because you cited a couple of examples where brands are quote unquote being influenced, in my opinion, very negatively by loud voices. And so you may have seen recently, and I firmly believe this is a bad decision and a very unfortunate decision, when very large brands will go and say that they're now cutting their DE&I. And or you won't support, for example, the most recent Tractor Supply, John Deere, Lowe's, etc. Like, I then question, as a consumer, will I support those brands? And so the thing that I feel like becomes more visible is, why are they changing the direction? And I believe it's being changed because of some loud voices on the very conservative right wing side influencing those brands. So equally, I think what we are obligated to do is to become educated on how companies are choosing to promote their DE&I programs on the workforce level and on the supply chain and the procurement level, and support those with our dollars and also with our voices. And you mentioned, obviously the younger workforce, it is a proven fact that the younger generation is asking the question, what are you doing with your supplier diversity? I will join companies who have a greater social impact, like you cited earlier, 70%. That is inclusive of supplier diversity. However, I just don't believe that a lot of individuals are aware of the terminology in order to articulate how they connect those dots. But the power is significant. When you are spending, and that's why I say, when you look at a company that spends billions of dollars, and if they can direct 50%, 12% of that to a diverse owned business, then that will naturally create more social impact in our communities. We have to support more of those. We need to hold them accountable if they made public commitment. We need to ask these questions so it becomes more visible versus unknown, in my opinion.
That's so many good points. And I think you made a point about terminology, and I think about that a lot in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know some of the reasons why it's under attack is just like, people want to be racist, and that is your path. But at the same time, sometimes I can't help but wonder, because a lot of the strategic work I do is in the narrative space, communications. I can't help but wonder if there are places where we're not communicating the intent in a way that is even accurate. Like the numbers that you're citing, like, oh, could you spare 12% of your budget, 50%? We're not talking about like replacement, like things that lead to that
Yeah.
dangerous backlash and conspiracy. We're talking about closing gaps.
Correct.
We're talking about closing representation gaps and bringing more people in, which is ultimately healthier for the overall economy, which is what we should all want. Like even the most staunch capitalist should be invested in everybody being more prosperous,
That's right.
and having a kind of collective prosperity mindset. On that, as the cultural temperament has changed, and there has been backlash and suspicion and criticism of things like ESG, social impact, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. I just saw this past week a book review in the Wall Street Journal for a book written by a Fox Business, I want to say correspondent or journalist, called Go Woke, Go Broke, talking about how it's a horrible idea for any business with shareholders to do any social impact, even in the face of all of the facts that we're talking about now that are sourced directly from consumers. Have you experienced any disruption to the work that you're trying to do? And if so, how have you either planned for it or, you know, navigated it, or even just in vulnerability been knocked back by it? I think it would be helpful to hear what it's really like out there at this time.
I will say that if you think about what we want to accomplish, it comes down to, for me at least, accountability. And one of the areas that you may notice is that a lot of public companies who do their earnings statement calls used to make ESG and kind of even supplier diversity called out in their earnings calls, and DE&I initiatives in their earning calls, and sustainability in the earning calls. Now it is shifting. It's becoming not as front leading as it used to be. I would say that we're, to your earlier comment as you kicked us off, we are in interesting times. But I am an optimist. I firmly believe leaning into the positive and exploring, even when the tides may feel like they're changing, the equal side is not changing. So we like it feels kind of split, in my opinion. Like there are lots and lots of businesses, which is why I go back to business can drive great impact in our world, because it's not fully always. I mean, politics fully influences, but our buying power still exists. And so I believe in leaning in the positive. And I'll give you an example now in my retirement from my previous world. I have the great opportunity to be a strategic advisor to two or three businesses at the moment. One is LGBT owned, one is uh, certified with the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council, one's woman owned. So you have like, and I am a big believer that now how I choose to spend my time, how I try to influence the businesses, because I'm on the other side of being a supplier to big corporations. I am a big believer on holding us accountable to say, okay, within our own power, how do we influence a positive change in the revenue that we make? So allocating revenue back in. So for an example, I work with TechWise and Advantage, and they are a staffing agency. So we help people find jobs, whether it's contingent labor or full time. But and people might say, well, what's that all about? But everybody needs a job, right? Now you might need help finding one. But the bigger point that I'm trying to make is every time we have an opportunity, regardless of what our business is, you have an opportunity to influence your senior leaders to want to drive impact into the community, as small or big as they're comfortable with. The beauty is, what I believe is, once we start doing that more and more and more, and you tell the story of how it really impacts our community, it makes it real. And then it like sets off the folks who are trying to push us against the journey in which we're trying to achieve.
I see what you're saying. So to keep the sort of the storytelling going, to not let the backlash drown out the narratives that we know are true of real impact, of real consumer desire, of real employee desire. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'll back you up, Ken. I think it's a long game. And where that rubs against, if the example is that DEI or ESG used to be in the quarterly earnings reports. It's not going to happen quarter by quarter. This is a long-term strategy. If you're really genuinely trying to affect social change, it won't happen overnight or over quarters or even years. But I think, and absolutely, Kat, I've read the reports, I've seen, luckily not in my company, but to other peers or companies, departments being defunded or people losing their jobs or their mandates. And it is really hard to see, but I think that has happened more in the cases where the original intent, if it was just something that a company decided to do as a 2020 special, like in the wake of the racial justice uprising.
That's real.
And, their employees see that and their consumers will see that. And I think we should be taking note of that, not holding up their end of the bargain and holding them accountable with our money, with what we buy. But I do think maybe part of why the attacks on wokeism or DI, ESG, whatever effort is being employed to affect change in the world, it reminds me too of like the attacks on voting rights, which when John Lewis, may he rest in peace and power, was talking about voting rights, this was like a bipartisan issue, like democracy, and that we should all have easy and fair access to the ballot. And it has become so politicized that you do hear some partner companies that are like, oh, we can't do our voting campaign, or I'm having trouble trying to make the same kind of voting campaign happen, which, by the way, is a corporate entity. We have to stay nonpartisan. We don't tell anybody who to vote for. We just tell them to vote. Mm-hmm. And I know in some cases, depending which shows I'm working through, which talent, that's going to drive out a diversity of opinions. But, if you believe in the foundation of our country here in the United States, the case that I've been making most recently is that we can't have a strong economy without a strong democracy. Like these things go hand in hand. And I do think to take it back to, the other efforts for social change, whether DI or ESG or diversity of our suppliers, like it is all connected. And I think that if we really do step out of like the attacks and the politics, is like, let's imagine the world that we want to create. And I do believe that all of these programs, even as their brands or the acronyms have been under attack, are central to who we want to be as whatever that community is, country, city, world. And that, abandonment is not, we don't have time for that. And that there's a case to be made to continue it in a way that's authentic and will build towards our shared vision.
So well said. So well said. Mm-hmm. I love the reminder about it being a long game. I think it's hard. I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to have a space like this, because I find that social impact just asks so much of you. Like you have to have such a deep well of faith and optimism and forward-lookingness and belief. You're not going to get the dopamine hit of, I hit my quarterly numbers. You're just not going to get it. Like, it's just like, I don't know, I'm putting this out there and I'm having faith that good things will come from it. But it's affirming to hear that reminder again, and to kind of just, because, in my space, because I do have more of an inclusive lens on the work that I do, it's hard not to feel attacked. I was literally reviewing an agreement with a partner a few months ago, and the state in which they're based is hostile to DEI. And I'm looking through and seeing if it's still legal for me to use certain words, or if I make a recommendation, they like couldn't legally run the campaign. It's like, it's a wild time. But I really take to heart what you're saying, that it's about a long arc of change, and not expecting to see an immediate win with no feedback, no negative opinions, no pushback, endless resourcing. Like, we have to be thicker skinned in this work, and we have to be more agile and weather the storms that come internally and externally. So thank you for that wisdom. I want to wind us down. Well, let me say that I don't want to wind us down, but I also don't want to hold you hostage. So I have 3 closing prompts. You can answer all of them, some of them just parting thoughts for our community. So one is, I'm always curious what people do to sustain themselves in this work, to hold on to their motivation, to hold on to their optimism. I've heard from both of you in your own way that you need it. You need to give yourself a little gas to just keep moving forward. But for folks who are needing a little replenishment, what are some of the tips and tricks that you use, even personally, to keep yourself in a healthy space with the work? So that's one. The other one is, if you could have people take away one thought from this conversation, what would you want it to be? And the third is just a plug. If you have anything that you're currently working on that you want the issue space community to know about, I'd love to hear it.
I think, to the question of what keeps me going, especially when, as you noted, it can be hard, and it won't change overnight, and we won't achieve the mission fully. But I do think we can see signs of change, and the keep going, that we should really celebrate when we have them. And I tap into I'm a mom, and I tap into my kids and understanding their view of the world. And I say that in the context of reminding myself what my points of view were. And hearing them, talk about their feelings, because so much of my work is focused on youth mental health, hearing them talk about their feelings in ways that I know I didn't always feel like I had the space to do. That is just so gratifying. It's obviously a very in my world, but I hear this in my work, and there are sometimes the feedback can be positive too. Like when we'll do a piece of content on social focused on how to support your peers, and you see the comments from people on TikTok and Instagram being like, "Oh, I'm going to use this tip with my friend who's really struggling." Like it's really getting out there, and those mean a lot. So hearing the voices of young people, whether my own or the ones out there that say, "Hey, when I see myself, when I watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and you make a call to action to donate whatever I can to the Drag Defense Fund, so that in states where drag is banned, we can defend queens who don't have the legal resources for it." It's a partnership we did at the ACLU. I guess that's a bit of a plug for the work. And even if they only gave $1, if they couldn't afford it, they liked it, they promoted it. Like that, young people continue to be my source of my juice, the gas that fills the tank. And I know I won't see all the change I seek in my lifetime, but if I can know that from when I started doing the work to when I end it, that it's better for my kids and all kids, that keeps me going.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Erica.
I agree. So beautifully said. So I would say, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I have to constantly remind myself that I want to lean into the positive. I'm an optimist, so that's part of my identity. And when I'm feeling the need to be reminded, I kind of take a break and just kind of have a moment. I really think also I strive to surround myself in a community of individuals who want to drive a greater impact, because it fuels my spirit. I love it. I am so grateful for my friends and my family and both of you. Like this conversation, it fuels my spirit, and I hope that everyone who is able to listen finds a way in which they might be able to do the same for themselves, even when it gets hard. Because if you can celebrate the small wins, celebrate the big wins, focus on the positive, and try to acknowledge, where we're having challenges, but not give it too much extra power. And that is what I strive to accomplish. I want to do bigger and better things greater than myself always. I feel like that, and that's why I love your platform so much. It's just being able to really be a part of a community of like-minded individuals who want to drive a social positive impact is just fabulous. And I think when we're feeling kind of beat down or discouraged, then I think we just need to reach out to our community in that positive way. The second thing I might just kind of reiterate, I do think holding big businesses accountable is important. And there is power in following money, regard if it's your own or a business's, and how they spend. And I do believe that by doing so, we can hopefully achieve a greater impact. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment in my life.
I love it. The heart and the head. We love it.
Yeah.
Ken and Erica, I can't thank you enough for coming into this space and just sharing your perspective and your wisdom with the community. I know it will go far. Everybody listening and joining us, thank you so much for doing so. Again, you can learn more about us at issuespacemedia.com, and we'll see you next time.